Good morning. It's great to be together.
Good morning.
See smiling faces, and it's just I'm loving summer right now. And, I wanted to honor Ryan here and just say a quick prayer as it's important to as we get started. Let's pray. God, it is great to be here to worship you, and God, I pray that's where our hearts and our minds are this morning. I pray that you help us to be focused really on you, your love for us, and God, I pray that we can just bask in that love this morning. I pray that you talk through Carol and I, say the words that you want to say through us, that we can be vessels of your will, and just pray that we can have open hearts and open minds to whatever you want to teach us this morning. And I'm just grateful to be here as family and to love for one another. And pray these things in Jesus' name. Amen. And Kay, we will have a bunch of scripture too. So we're going through the series of the book on Psalms 23, and we're kind of taking turns here. Ness got to talk about green pastures and still waters, and we get to talk about restoration. And I was trying to figure out why us for restoration.
Yeah, really.
And then we were at a retreat last weekend, and part of the retreat we were looking at our strengths, and so we took this survey. What was the name of it? I don't remember the name of the survey. Yeah, so basically, it's assessing your strengths based on a survey that you've taken. It's a long series of questions, and you try and answer the question that best fits you. And then it gives you the 5 greatest strengths at the end. And my greatest strength was restorative. So I guess that's why. And it all fits with what my dad used to tell me. I'm the youngest of 5 kids. Then we had a 6th later when he remarried. But he always said, Pat, you're the fixer. You're always the rescuer. You always have to fix the relationships that's not going right or not going the way you think it should. There's conflict in the family. You're always trying to fix it. And he said, and it fits with what you do. If the appliance is broken, anything in the house is broken, you got to take it apart. You got to put it back together. So I guess that's why we're up here and feeding green pastures, still water for that restoration. And Carol and I were both kind of thinking about what we want to say, and we really wanted to define restoration. And we know the definition of restoration when it relates to a car or furniture or even a relationship. And when you're restoring something, you're basically, the definition from Webster says that you're returning something to its original state or to a better state than you found it. And so when you're restoring your car, you're stripping it all down. You're taking all the rust off of it. You're taking all the parts apart, replacing the ones that have failed, and then putting it back together.
It could be an entirely new car when you're done.
That's right. Probably better than when you started. And the same thing with furniture. You take it, strip it down. Sometimes you pull it apart, you reglue it, put it back together, and it looks better than the original. Then as it applies to relationships, I was thinking about this, and we're a product of divorced families, and I was thinking about relationships are probably the hardest thing to restore, as evidenced by the amount of divorce that we have, the amount of conflict that we have in families. It's a lot of work to restore, and I think it's a whole lot easier to be restored in a relationship with God, because the other part of the equation is perfect.
That's right.
And so it doesn't have to have 2 imperfect people being restored. It's an imperfect person being restored to a loving and perfect God. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that this morning. And Psalms 23 is tough for me because I associate it with funerals. It's used almost exclusively in funerals. And I have vivid memories of both my grandparents, my father's parents at their funeral. And the only thing I remember from those funerals was Psalm 23. So I associate it with death and just not a great feeling. My oldest brother, Chris, has a strong liking for Psalm 23 and the Psalms as well, because I think he understands the restoration part of it. He's in recovery, addiction to drugs and alcohol, and he's been sober like 25, 26 years now. And he appreciates that whole concept of restoration. And so it kind of speaks to his his soul, and it's super important to him. And I never really thought about that until we started looking at what restoration really means in the Psalms and how important it is. And I wanted to just look at some scriptures. I was thinking the best way to define restoration is to look at it, all the instances in the Bible. And so you look at the Bible, and from the very beginning, there's restoration. There's a need for restoration. From Adam and Eve, Cain and Abel, even Noah had to be restored. Moses, Abraham. So through all of time, there's a common element where God's creation strays. God's creation is disobedient. God's creation just doesn't get it. Yeah. And so he has to make the work and create the restoration for his creation. First scripture we're going to look at is, actually, when I was looking through all the instances of restoration in the Bible, I was seeing a pattern there. And restoration is just, it's part of a cycle of life. And there's a pattern in the examples that I'm seeing. There's a pattern of blindness or ignorance. Yep. There's a pattern of beginning to understand why you need restoration. Then there's a pattern for wanting the restoration. And then there's finally the acceptance of it. Mm-hmm. That's in a successful restoration. Yeah. So I first looked at King David. And in 2 Samuel 12, Nathan approaches David after he's blown it with Bathsheba and with Uriah, her husband. And Nathan comes to David in verse 12 and says, "The Lord sent Nathan to David. When he came to him, he said, 'There were two men in a certain town, one rich and the other poor. The rich man had a very large number of sheep, but the poor man had nothing except one little ewe that he had bought. He raised it, and it grew up with him and his children. It shared his food, drank from his cup, and even slept in his arms. It was like a daughter to him. Now a traveler came to a rich man, but the rich man refrained from taking one of his own sheep or cattle and prepare a meal for the traveler who had come to him. Instead, he took the ewe lamb that belonged to the poor man and prepared it for the one who had come. David burned with anger against the man and said to Nathan, 'As surely as the Lord lives, the man who did this must die. He must pay for that lamb 4 times over, because he did such a thing and had no pity.' Then Nathan said to David, 'You are the man. This is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. I anointed you king over Israel. I delivered you from the hand of Saul. I gave your master's house to you, and your master's wives in your arms. I gave you all of Israel and Judah. And if all this had been too little, I would have given you even more. Why do you despise the word of the Lord by doing what is evil in his eyes? You struck down Uriah the Hittite with a sword and took his wife to be your own. You killed him with the sword of the Ammonites. Now, therefore, the sword will never depart from your house, because you despised me and took the wife of Uriah the Hittite to be your own. This is what the Lord says, out of your own household I'm going to bring calamity on you. Before your very eyes I will take your wives and give them to the one who is close to you, and you will sleep with your wives in broad daylight. You did it in secret, but I'll do this in broad daylight before all of Israel.' Then David said to Nathan, 'I have sinned against the Lord.' Nathan replied, 'The Lord has taken away your sin. You're not going to die. But because you're doing it, by doing this, you have shown utter contempt for the Lord. The son born to you will die.' After Nathan had gone home, the Lord struck the child that Uriah's wife had born to David, and he became ill. David pleaded with God for the child. He fasted and spent the nights laying in sackcloth on the ground. The elders of his household stood beside him to get him up from the ground, but he refused, and he would not eat any food with them. On the 7th day, the child died. David's attendants were afraid to tell them that the child was dead, for they thought, while the child was still living, he wouldn't listen to us when we spoke to him. How can we now tell him the child is dead? He may do something desperate. David noticed the attendants were whispering among themselves, and he realized the child was dead. 'Is the child dead?' he asked. 'Yes,' they replied, 'he is dead.' Then David got up from the ground, and after he had washed and put on lotions and changed his clothes, he went to the house of the Lord and worshipped. Then he went in his own house, and at his request, they served him food, and he ate. His attendants asked him, 'Why are you acting this way? While the child was alive, you fasted and wept, but now the child is dead, and you get up and eat?' He answered, 'While the child was still alive, I fasted and wept. I thought, who knows, the Lord may be gracious to me and let the child live. But now that he's dead, why should I go on fasting? Can I bring him back? I will go with him, but he will not return to me.' And it struck me that David he just blew it. He needs restoration. But he didn't know it. He didn't recognize it. He's just going on with his life. And Nathan comes and confronts him. God comes and confronts him. And David was just blind to it until he heard this story. Then he was enraged. And at that point, he went from being numb or blind to it to all of a sudden seeing a need for restoration of God, restoration of everybody that he'd wronged. And he goes through this whole mourning process of his son that's dying, and the whole concept of that just being taken from him. And he begins to evolve into an understanding of I need to restore my relationship with God. I need God. And before he didn't have that realization. And it seems odd to me that he was so blind to that, but I can identify. When I'm at my worst, that's when I see the need for restoration of God, the relationship with God, for my own part of my relationship with God.
Wow.
So that was King David, and then I want to look at, let's see, Saul of Tarsus, who we know as the Apostle Paul, in Acts 9. I think you'll see a correlation here.
Come on, Pat.
In Acts 9, it's the NIV titles this section as Saul's conversion. And I don't believe that. I don't think it's Saul's conversion. I think it's Saul's restoration. Because he didn't need to be converted in anything. And in Saul's mind, he was doing what was right.
Right.
He was obedient to the law.
That's right.
He was seeking out God's will and executing it. So he didn't need to be converted to anything. He needed to be restored because what he thought was right wasn't right. And God had to point it out to him. In Acts 9, verse 1, it says, "Meanwhile, Saul was still breathing out murderous threats against the Lord's disciples. He went on to the high priest and asked him for letters to the synagogues in Damascus, so that if he found any there who belonged to the way, whether men or women, he might take them as prisoners to Jerusalem. As he neared Damascus on the journey, suddenly a light from heaven flashed around him. He fell to the ground, heard a voice say to him, 'Saul, Saul, why do you persecute me?' 'Who are you, Lord?' Saul asked. 'I'm Jesus whom you're persecuting,' he replied. 'Now get up and go into the city, and you'll be told what you must do.' Men traveling with Saul stood there speechless. They heard the sound, but did not see anyone. Saul got up from the ground, and when he opened his eyes, he could see nothing. They led him by the hand into Damascus. For 3 days he was blind and did not eat or drink anything. In Damascus there was a disciple named Ananias. The Lord called to him in a vision. 'Ananias.' 'Yes, Lord,' he answered. The Lord had told him, 'Go to the house of Judas on Straight Street and ask for a man from Tarsus named Saul, for he is praying. In a vision he has seen a man named Ananias come and place his hands on him to restore his sight.' 'Lord,' Ananias answered, 'I've heard many reports about this man and all the harm he has done to the holy people of Jerusalem. And he has come here with authority from the chief priests to arrest all who call on your name.' But the Lord said to Ananias, 'Go, this man is my chosen instrument to proclaim the name of the Gentiles and their kings and the people of Israel. I will show him how much he must suffer for my name.'" And again, we start the whole story, and Saul's blind, but not really blind. So God takes him to the next step and makes sure he's blind.
Wow.
And he starts that process of restoration. And I think, again, Saul needed to be broken to understand what he was doing was not right. And I think that's the hard part of when we talk about restoration, why it's kind of a bad word to us, is because it's painful.
Yeah.
It's a painful process. And in order for that process to take its course, we have to have the faith and the hope that what we're going through is going to produce restoration with God. And I think for myself, that's my biggest struggle. I can see the stories. I can even identify the need for restoration, but I can get caught up in, do I really want to go through the pain of it? Do I want to do what's right so they can get to the other side? And it's tough. And Steve had brought up a bunch of sheep facts in his lesson, and I found another sheep fact that a sheep, the way it's built, can actually get knocked on its back, and it's like a turtle can't get back up, and they call it casting. The sheep is casted. And the if the sheep doesn't have any help, it could be there for days and it could even die because it can't eat or drink. And I think there are a lot of times where I'm in that situation where I'm cast and I know I need help, but I don't want to seek the help.
Yeah.
Or I don't know how to seek the help. And so I just lay there on my back, downcast. And it struck me as, all those simple sheep facts have a whole lot of meaning. So, and again, Paul has to go through the hard stuff, and he has to get to the other side for the restoration of his relationship with God. And then I want to look at the Apostle Peter. So we looked at this scripture last week on the retreat, and Steve Schaff had asked us to just think about our relationship if we had breakfast with Jesus, and what a relationship and what our conversation would be like with Jesus. It gave me, it made me think a lot about what happened. And Peter in his denial of Jesus 3 times, and then Jesus comes to him in John 21 and verse 15 and to be reinstated. And in verse 15 it says, when they had finished eating, Jesus said to Simon Peter, Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these? Yes, Lord, he said. You know that I love you. Jesus said, feed my lambs. Again, Jesus said, Simon, son of John, do you love me? He answered, yes, Lord. You know that I love you. Jesus said, take care of my sheep. The 3rd time he said to him, Simon, son of John, do you love me? Peter was hurt because Jesus asked him the 3rd time, do you love me? He said, Lord, you know all things. You know that I love you. Jesus said, feed my sheep. Very truly I tell you, when you were younger, you dressed yourselves and went where you wanted to. But when you're old, you will stretch out your hands, and someone will dress you and lead you where you don't want to go. Jesus said this to indicate the kind of death that Peter would glorify God. Then he said to him, follow me. And I think anybody that's read the whole story of Peter's denial in this situation, and they say, well, why did Jesus ask him 3 times? And the common response is, well, he denied him 3 times. And I started thinking about that, and in the Bible, numbers mean things.
Wow.
And the meaning throughout the Bible of the number 3 is completeness.
Wow.
So if it was 3 times that Peter denied him, he denied him completely. And so in this whole restoration, Peter's he's hurting, he's feeling, well, why do you keep asking me that? And I think Jesus and God were saying, if you want complete restoration, it's got to be 3 times. You got to reassure me. You got to reassure me completely. And Jesus ends the whole interaction with a little bit of bad news about how he's going to die, but then he says, just follow me. And that's really the end result of any act of restoration that we go through with God. That's all he's just trying to do. He's trying to get us to come back. Trying to get us to do what's best for ourselves. Trying to get us to realize that what we're pursuing in our blindness, in our stubbornness, is not what we need to do. Right? It's simple, but it's stuff we're blind to. I was going to give you one more example. I think I'm going to let Carolyn talk.
I just feel like we could just be done.
Come on, Carolyn.
Amen.
You're amazing. Thanks, hon. So when I first thought of restoration, I immediately thought of Netflix and the show Restoration Shop.
Yes.
How many of you spent a lot of COVID watching that? I love it because it's like this place you go in England, and it's like people bring their treasures from like World War II and things of like anything from a small locket to a violin that was played in a concentration camp, like things that really meant something to these families. And this small thatched roof cottage is filled with experts, like specific, like watchmaker who's world renowned. He can fix any watch. But the whole point of the restorations is that they're always saying it's a compassionate restoration. Like they're not going to they even talk about like not polishing the outside of the watch to make it brand spanking new. Like they want to leave the dents because there's a story behind the dents. Or with the violin, that was played by this woman to survive in the camps. There's this little, and I'm not a musician, but any of you are, and you've played violin, you know there's this little piece of fluff from the resin in the bow over the years. It just sort of tumbles inside the violin instrument. And the guy pulls this thing out, this little piece of fluff inside this instrument, after he's, brought it back. It hadn't been played in probably 50 years. And he pulls it out with tweezers. It's this little tiny piece of fluff. And he says, this was from all the music she played in the concentration camp. So we're not going to take this out. We're going to put it back in.
Yeah.
And I just thought, like, that's so gentle. Like, that's God with us, like, with our souls. Like, he's super... I mean, he's got to sand some rough patches out, and we've all got those rough edges and stuff, but he's super compassionate with us. And I guess one thing that's been kind of, like, I don't know, coming back to me, like, in the line when I'm thinking of things, is the story of Jacob and how he wrestled with God. And, like, Jacob starts off, even as a young boy, he's manipulative, and he's, like, trying to get his brother's birthright, and he lies to his dying father. And this guy is like all about me. And yet here he is in the Bible. I'm thinking, why? Like, why are we giving this guy space? But when I think about it, like, it resounds with me, like, trying my whole life. Like, I want God's blessing. I want God's blessing. And why am I not getting blessed? And why am I so frustrated? And why are we feeling all this loss from such a young age? It's like, you mean it was just one parent? Like, hello. We have to have all these step-parents and step-grandparents. It's like, I just wanted one, like, just one that would, like, love me, right?
Yeah.
And I think, like, with Jacob, he just was so desperate to be blessed with what he thought would be a blessing. And so Jacob wrestles all night, and he's strong. And this angel's just sort of like, he's like with my sister. They'd be, like, holding me back like this, and I'd be swinging punches, and they'd be like, Carolyn. And if my arms weren't long enough, and I'd be like, ah! And they remind me of the fact that I was little and powerless, and anyway. But so Jacob's fighting this angel, and he doesn't give up all night long. And you've got to think, like, how exhausting would that be? And that's kind of like me at night. Like, I'm wrestling with God, and I wake up, I can't sleep, I'm praying about things, I'm mostly worrying about things, perseverating on things, and then I start to pray, and then I wake up the next morning, I'm like, oh, God put me to sleep. Like, I started praying, and then he, like, blessed me to sleep. And it's like, so Jacob, in the morning, in the dawn, when there are no more shadows, and there's, and it's clear footing, the angel touches his hip and puts it out of socket. And basically saying, you wrestled with me, you've wrestled with God, and you're strong, but I'm going to give you something to remember. You are not God. You don't know what the plan is. You need to trust me. And Jacob limps the rest of his life. The Bible says it's got to been really painful, with no PT, no OT, nothing like that. No MRI, no surgeon. Like, you live with that thing, it hurts. No copay, that's true. And I think about the things that I really, really want in life. I just really want my relationship with God to bring me joy. Like, I want to feel safe. I want to feel secure. I want to be loving to people. I don't want to struggle with my character sins anymore. I don't want to have all the coping mechanisms that I had from childhood to be my personality. Like, oh, Carolyn, she's really funny. Or Carolyn, she's really hardworking. Or she's really this or that. Well, yeah, you know me long enough. That's mostly coping mechanisms with how to get through life. I can read a room really well. One of my top personality strengths is empathy. It's like I'm a bleeding heart. I feel for everything in the room. I can tell you, like, that person over there, I don't know who they are, but they're going through something, and it's exhausting. Really, it's exhausting. And so I think I don't want my character flaws, my sin, to be my personality. Oh, that's just who I am. I really want people to feel loved. I really want my character, when I leave this world, to be fruits of the Spirit. Specifically peace, specifically joy. And I'm avoiding the patient one because I really I'm avoiding that one.
Nobody's got time for that.
I know. And I'm very lately going off the rails here. Jacob, yep. So, but in the end, you look at like Psalm 85, and the Bible picks up and talks about Jacob again. And it's Jacob's restoration, and it's like he praying. Let me just look on the phone. Look, Psalm 85, Read about Jacob, it's in there. He gets restored, and it's just a quick one-liner that, he's restored. You know that Jacob means Israel, his new name. God gives him a new name after that battle at night. He's like, you know what? You need a new name because you're a different person. And that's God's restoration with us. He gives us a new name. He calls us his. Second here. You know, when I think about who Jesus is, we were talking about this in the car on the way here, like Jesus learned obedience through what he suffered. Suffering's not a bad thing. It doesn't feel great at the time, but it's not a bad thing. Job, we love Job. Job lost everything, right? He's who you look at when you feel like, I've lost everything. You look at Job. Because Satan actually asked permission to sift Job like wheat. He's going to lose everything, just everything. The only thing that's going to be left is his relationship with God. And that's really what life is about. It's like sifting everything out, testing us. The only thing that's worth it is our relationship with God.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah, Pat and I often joke when we're like taking down a big tree and we're like limbing it, and I have my own little chainsaw, and we're like, you know, my little junior size, and we're like limbing these trees, and we're trying to like make our firewood for the winter, and we're just like covered in sweat, and we look over at each other, and we're like, are we there yet? And it's like, no one's gonna take this tree down but us. Like, there's no one gonna come out, except maybe sometimes Rod. It's like, are we there yet? And I feel like spiritually, sometimes I get exhausted. I'm just like, God, are we there yet? Like, I just want to be there. You know, for the rest of my life, like you think about it, like, what is the rest of your life? What is the rest in your life? Like, where do you find rest? For me, I think it's really just working on really trusting God again. Like the last 6.75 years. I know there's a magic 7 in the Bible, so I'm like, okay, God, these things are going to change in 7 years. Just unlearning protective responses and begging for the fruits of the Spirit, and really taking to heart some things I learned from Sue. You know, she always says, I get to. When things are hard, she's like, well, I get to do this, or I get to do that. And I'm really trying to replace like my natural responses, which is like, oh, I really want to do that, but I know I should. It's like, no. I truly get to, or I have to, or I should. It's like, no, I get to. I get to go to work. And one thing that I don't know, just kind of came full circle. The last day of school was on Friday. It was a half day for the kids, and after they leave, the teachers like celebrate. But but I had a really challenging job as a school nurse, and it's one of the highest need schools in the district. It's 24% poverty. With that goes a lot of childhood ACEs. With that goes a lot of struggle for a lot of families. And COVID's been particularly tough here. But that's why I chose the school to work at. Like I felt like I could really use all my skills of being a nurse for 23 years. Like I could really make a difference in these kids' lives. And so the kids get off the bus and they're like, oh, you know, every day they're like the same. You see the kids who, you know their background, you know where they're coming from, and your heart just breaks. And you can see the kids that are just struggling in so many different ways. And I thought, you know, this last day of school, I'm just going to pray over these kids as they come, like as fast as I can for these kids. I know most of their names by now, and it's a big school, and I'm just like, this child, Lord, protect them through the summer, help them be safe with their body. Lord, help them, you know, like, please let them make good choices and protect the innocence of this little one. She goes through surgeries every 6 months for, you know, spinal surgeries every 6 months, and don't let this one get COVID, because, you know, and my heart just softened, and I thought, that's a shepherd, right? Looking after the little ones. I'm going to miss them. They're good kids. Maybe I get to see them next year. But, just think like what we're supposed to be for each other is that shepherd, right? Like looking around, making sure that people's needs are being met. Like if someone's looking sad, like ask those questions. Sometimes you got to ask more than once, more than twice. And the third time, you usually get an honest answer, right? And I think that's the heart of Jesus. Like he was a man of suffering. He was familiar with it. He loved deeply. He longed to bring Jerusalem under his arms. He longed to love. And that's where I think we feel most whole, is when we feel we have that purpose and we're living that way. And it's about our restoration and it's about their restoration. And really it's about making sure we're walking each other home, right? Like we all get there together. And anyway, to go from the repair shop to this, I just feel like God shows us so many times in every day, little tiny things, how much He loves us, how much He longs to have restoration with us. And I will put one last pitch in here for this book, Gentle and Lowly. Jeanette gave this to me when I was in a very dark place not so long ago. It's by Dane Ortland, and it's really rich. And I only now this morning, over a year and a half, he gave it to me. There are sheep on the cover. I just noticed that. I was like, oh, there's a little black sheep too. It's interesting. These little ones that are cast down in the river, and it's like some painting from the Renaissance or something. But anyway, it's a great book. It says it's the heart of Christ for sinners and sufferers, and it's just a really gentle, full of grace book. Just really, just stretching my mind, stretching my understanding, my faith. It's been a really helpful tool for me. So I'm happy to lend it out again.
Amen.
Thank you.
I forgot to bring a list. I made a list of everywhere I saw restoration in the Bible. And in Psalms 23, it's restore my soul, but there's a long list of restore my health. Jeremiah's told that in Jeremiah 30, I believe. Psalm 85, Jacob has restored his household and his belongings. Same with Job. There's a lot of restoration, but the ultimate restoration is really what we should be focusing on.
Yeah.
You know, 'cause we have our times of desperation where we want to be restored with a new job or a better situation in our finances or whatever. And those are all important things. We can't stop there. We can't stop and forget that the ultimate restoration is really restoring to God. And that's what matters most. And I was thinking about the times with Peter, breakfast with Peter. I think so many times just whining about life and wanting things to be restored and not really having a conversation about our relationship with God, where that's at. You know, we can share in our own lives all these things that we want to do or dreams or whatever, but are we really talking about our relationship with God with one another?
Yeah.
Walking with each other, right? How important that is. And the final story I want to share with you guys is the story of the cross, because it's really why we're here. And I was looking at the crucifixion of Jesus, and I've always looked at it from his perspective and from the perspective of those on the ground watching it happen. And he paid the ultimate price, endured the pain, the shame, the ridicule, all for the restoration of us to God. And so I've looked at it from Jesus' perspective, I looked at it from the crowd's perspective, looked at it from my perspective. But I was thinking last weekend, I've never looked at it from God's perspective. As he's watching this happen, he's hoping it happens.
Yeah.
He's relying on Jesus to make it happen.
Right.
Not because he's the fixer, but because he wants that relationship with us. And it means that much to him.
Right.
And I've never really looked at that perspective, how God just longs to be restored to us. God just longs to be with us. And he created us. And we've gone astray. And we continue through that cycle of going astray. All he wants from us is that restoration.
Yeah.
And it's a pretty powerful thought. Because when I can think about it from Jesus' perspective, I feel guilty. And it kind of bums me out. And when I look at it from my perspective as well. But looking at it from the perspective of God, that's pretty powerful.
Yeah.
And my dad used to tell a story all the time about three guys who went hiking. And they get lost. And one guy's a minister, one guy's an engineer, and the third guy's a psychologist. And they're beginning to lose hope that they're ever going to find their way out of the woods. And they come along the cabin. And so they go up, knock on the door, there's no answer. And they say, it's getting dark, we should probably just go in. And so they open the door, and it's just a kind of run-of-the-mill cabin. Except for there's one thing that's different. In the middle of the largest room, there's a stove, wood stove. And it's hanging from the ceiling with baling wire. And so the three of them start arguing, obviously, the engineer says, this guy knows thermodynamics. And he knows that if he raises the stove up, there'll be a better flow of heat throughout the house. So it's a very practical solution to the problem. And the psychologist says, no, you don't understand. You have to think about it from the mind's perspective. He wants to return the womb. So he raises the stove up, curls up underneath it, and he's getting that feeling of returning to the womb. And the minister says, no. That's fire lifted up. It's been a symbol throughout the Bible. And as they're arguing about it, the guy that owns the cabin walks in and startles the guy that turns and we're arguing about why do you have this stove in the middle of the room held up by baling wire? What's the significance of that? Settle the argument for us. And the guy said, had a lot of baling wire, but not much stovepipe. I tell that story because we need to have everybody's perspective, right?
Yeah.
We need, as a team, we need to figure things out in life.
Yeah.
And as we're restored by God in every stages of our lives, we need to have the perspective of others. Even if it's wrong, we'll learn from all the different perspectives, or even if it's, I would say it's wrong, but it's just different. Right? And we need that perspective. And so I want to encourage you this morning as we take communion to just think about the perspective of the cross from everybody's perspective. When Peter can't be there because he completely denied Jesus. When John and Jesus' mother are there, just in horror of what's going on. From God's perspective, just hoping that this plan is going to work, that he's going to get the restoration of his creation. So think about those things as we pray and take communion. God, I'm grateful that we can be here this morning as family, that we can really understand you better. We can understand Jesus' sacrifice better because we are a family with different perspectives. We all have something to offer to one another because you created us for that purpose. And God, I just pray that we can have soft hearts and